Maki Matebule says she never depended on anyone to survive, except herself. She makes and sells acha, a kind of mango pickle. All along their street, parties and politicians are vying for the Matebule family vote.
People who are in charge now, they're just making things worse.
The politicians, they get rich as we get poor. There is nothing to do for us.
Nelson Mandela represented the possibilities of a free South Africa. Voting lines stretched for blocks in 1994. The first democratic election held the promise of a better future. Now, millions of born frees, South Africans born after the apartheid regime ended, haven't even registered to vote in this election.
Are you going to vote?
Hell no.
25 years on, and around half of young people are jobless. Much of the black majority is stuck in a poverty trap, kept there in part by rampant government corruption. By some estimates, South Africa has become the most unequal nation on earth.
No, I'm not going to vote.
Why not?
I've survived without voting, man.
Young South Africans like designer Wilson Nembe didn't see apartheid firsthand.
Okay. Just check it out.
Their struggles are with the new South Africa.
As a born free, maybe we were promised mansions. I don't know that.
Do you have a mansion?
I don't have a mansion.
And are you voting this year?
No, since I was born, I'm voting for Mandela only, and no more voting again.
And until they see real change in Alex, the Matibules will never cast another ballot. David McKenzie, CNN, Alexandra, South Africa.
Their plots foiled, 3 terrorists rant. Bombs primed and on the brink of annihilation, they boast of taking their families with them. They made that video as the police and army were closing in on their position. And then they took the final option, self-immolation, suicide and the murder of their children and wives. 2 brothers and the father of Zahan Hashim, the alleged mastermind of Sri Lanka's Easter massacres, killed themselves, their 3 wives and 6 children with 3 bombs. The Hashim brothers were identified by the police and their sister, who spoke to CNN. We have hidden her identity for her own security.
I have a suspicion that the 6 children who died are from our family.
Hashim's daughter and wife somehow survived and are stable in hospital. While they recovered, families of people his gang murdered in nearby Batticaloa were unable to attend services on Sunday. There are government warnings of more attacks. Like this, where last week a Hashim follower is filmed on CCTV idling outside the Zion Church, waiting for the end of Sunday school. Then he heads down the alley, sets off his bomb. The blast is felt by worshippers, and then they are struck with incredulous terror. He killed 26 people, 14 of them children. The Sankathuma family lost Sharon, 12, and Sarah, 10. He loved art. She was sporty and mischievous. Celicia, their little sister, is now an only child. How do you feel towards the people who did this to you?
Because we are Christians, we are not supposed to retaliate. We didn't expect this to happen, but still we can't do anything to them.
Do you agree?
Yes, the Lord has taught us about love. We cannot do anything, but they will reap what they sow.
Terror has now been sown here, but Sri Lankans are determined that it won't produce a harvest of poison. Sam Kiley, CNN, Batticaloa, Sri Lanka.
Kate, I've got to ask you this question. Has Meghan Markle adopted a British accent? There are some people here who think maybe she has.
All over Twitter, it's this big discussion. Has she got a British accent? Strictly speaking, for someone in Britain, it's not British yet. It's not. But it is on the way. I think that she's obviously slowing down her language, enunciating more as royals try to do so everyone can understand them.
Kate,
so
let
this
us
is what we
people
see.
listen for themselves real quick, see what they think. Here, hold on, I want to play.
Nice to meet you. My name's Aya. Aya. I've been a fan of you for so long. What's that? I watched you for so long. I watched you. Yeah. You designed it, so it's very nice. And you look gorgeous on the wedding day.
Yeah, Kate, to be honest, I don't hear it that much. Our executive producer, Adam, who is also British, he's the one who really wants this played here, and I think that he seems to hear it. So you said you don't hear it.
What I hear actually is how a lot of Americans and Canadians speak in this country when they've been here for a long time, surrounded by British people. They've lost perhaps the more pronounced American accent, but they still have a lot of touches, and she still sounds very American to me. And also, she's not quite British. She's very warm, very friendly. Yeah. You don't see many British royals being quite so friendly as she is. Very, very open.
India's Foreign Secretary has confirmed a preemptive airstrike carried out inside the Pakistan-controlled Kashmir territory. The confirmation comes hours after Pakistan's military claimed their airspace had been violated by Indian Air Force jets. Tuesday's air raid was said to have targeted an alleged training camp run by a Pakistan-based terrorist group.
The government of India is firmly and resolutely committed to taking all necessary measures to fight the menace of terrorism. Hence, this non-military preemptive action was specifically targeted at the Jaish-e-Mohammed camp. The selection of the target was also conditioned by our desire to avoid civilian casualties. The facility is located in thick forest on a hilltop, far away from any civilian presence.
Well, a Pakistani military spokesman tweeted that a payload dropped from Indian aircraft had no casualties or damage. This significant escalation of hostilities follows a suicide attack that killed at least 40 Indian security personnel in India-administered Kashmir earlier this month.
I want to bring in Phil Mudd, a former CIA counterterrorism official. And Phil, how big a threat is this? How unusual is this?
I wouldn't look at it at this point as a big threat. It's something, if you're behind the scenes, you got to pay attention to. My question would be obviously where they're going. They going to Yemen? They going to Syria? The bigger question, which Barbara can't answer, I suspect the Pentagon can't answer, and the intel wouldn't tell us, is why are they sending them? I find the interesting aspect that the administration's play on this. Are they playing this because we have a page A1 threat, a threat that should be on CNN, or are they playing this because we've demonized Iran? Iran, we have to rip up the nuclear deal. Iran's a problem in Syria. Iran's a problem backing people who oppose Israel. Is this a real threat, or is this a jacked-up threat because the White House wants to expose Iran?
And the Trump administration responded by moving U.S. warships to deter Iran's threat. That would seem to be a serious move to at least speed up that process.
Yeah, but hold on a second here. We're talking about assuming that there's actually a threat, for example, to U.S. allies or U.S. forces. Maybe they're just delivering missiles to a place where they already have allies and they want to stockpile them. The biggest problem in these cases is assuming you know how the other guy thinks. And I'm going to tell you, once you make that assumption, you're going to be wrong.
And you had the Trump administration move U.S. ships. You have Pompeo on the move because of pressing issues.
I've got to believe that he's moving because the White House is making this threat so prominent. I mean, there are other options on the table. Is there a deal on Venezuela he wants to talk about with the Russians, for example? I don't think so. I think given the fact that the White House and the National Security Advisor in the past couple of days have highlighted this, and the fact that he left Germany, that is, the Secretary of State left Germany so abruptly, he's going to go talk about this in the Middle East somewhere.
And you noted, I mean, tomorrow marks 1 year since President Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. Is it possible that they're just trying to bring attention to Iran as a threat, as you know?
I think so. I mean, I look at every case, and this might be overreaching, but every case I watch the president move, that is, he takes a U-turn on North Korea, takes a U-turn on policy on how we deal with NATO. They're sort of semi-enemies, the way he deals with them in meetings. Same with the G7, takes a U-turn on trade negotiations with Canada and with Mexico. We have the UN saying Iran has complied with a nuclear deal, and all of a sudden, we take a U-turn on Iran as well. I think this is another example of the president saying, I made a policy. The policy was to move away from Iran, and this shows you I was right.
And you have always said that you think the bigger threat is North Korea, and that's something that the administration maybe doesn't want to talk about right now.
Sure, because it's embarrassing. Bigger threat for a couple reasons. Number one, there's a capability reason. They have the capability they've shown to reach U.S. soil with ballistic missiles. But the second issue, the one reason I differentiate them from Iran, like it or not, Iran is a mature leadership. They've been around for a long time. Kim Jong-un, you want to tell me you can understand how he thinks and whether he'd ever pop a ballistic missile? I'd say I don't know. So that combination of capability and intent in North Korea would put them at the top of the list for me.
All right, Phil Mudd, thank you so much. You know all that sea ice that's melting rapidly and threatening to put many of the world's cities underwater. Well, America's top diplomat just seemed to suggest that there might be a bright side to that. Stay with us.
There are lots of reasons why people voted Brexit, but many of them are covered by one word: sovereignty. Brexiteers don't like to share it. From how many fish you can catch to who gets to live here and which court ultimately has the final say over British citizens. Many Brits get pretty cranky at the idea of having to follow rules and regulations set in Brussels, often by people they haven't voted for.
The European Union and the UK have agreed on an extension to the Brexit process to October 31st, with an option of the UK leaving earlier if Parliament can pass a deal. The new Halloween deadline, though, will no doubt conjure up horrors of the challenges that Theresa May faces. Number one, dissent from within her own party, those who do not want to be part of European parliamentary elections and who see an extension, a long extension, as a softer Brexit. Number two, deadlock when those cross-party talks with Jeremy Corbyn. Until now, they have not been able to reach some sort of consensus. And critically, number three, that is the question over Theresa May's tenure as Prime Minister, with increasing calls and pressure for her to resign as soon as possible. So Theresa May have got some breathing room from Europe, but the reality is that many here are losing patience with the Brexit process.
Well, it's no secret that the EU regrets Brexit and sees it as a historic mistake. If a country as large and as powerful as the United Kingdom wants to leave a club in which it helps shape the single market and benefits from security cooperation, among many other things, what does that say about the club itself? Nothing good. And so from the start, the EU's approach has been damage control.
The British pound has slumped since the UK voted to leave the EU, and it could fall even further in the event of a hard or no-deal Brexit. Now, that may be some good news for tourists hoping for a cheap trip to the UK, and for some British businesses which are export-heavy. But it's bad news for many. The cost of living for Brits is rising as imports become more expensive, and it's a similar story for some British businesses which have to import more materials. Plus, all the uncertainty over what the future trading relationship will be between the UK and the EU, well, that's forced some businesses to already hit their contingency plans. Big banks, for example, have already moved some operations from the UK to the EU.
The UK has been in decline for a century. Brexit is a milestone on that downward trajectory. Far from taking back control and turning the UK's fortunes around, it will leave the kingdom's citizens more isolated from allies, alliances and markets. Economic growth will be slower, intelligence sharing curtailed. But it's not as bleak as it sounds. The UK still has clout. It remains one of the 5 permanent members of the world's most powerful diplomatic body, the UN Security Council. Change won't be overnight, but the future as it comes will depend more on the billions of people beyond its borders than in the past.
We're following breaking news out of Israel, where officials say more than 200 rockets have been fired from Gaza towards Israel, injuring 2 Israelis. The Palestinian Ministry of Health says 2 people died, including a baby, after Israel retaliated with airstrikes. Oren Lieberman is near the Gaza border. So, Oren, what's happening?
Frederica, I'll take you right in behind me here. You can see the smoke trail from 3 rockets beginning to fade right now, but that's the smoke trail from 3 rockets that were launched just moments ago from the northern or central northern Gaza Strip as the fighting here continues. As you pointed out, the latest information from the Palestinian Ministry of Health is that a 1-year-old baby girl was killed in an Israeli airstrike, her pregnant mother wounded. That as the fighting here continues. To this point, Israel says more than 200 rockets have been fired from Gaza into Israel, and we saw evidence of more of that here behind us with the launches just moments ago here, and that continues. Meanwhile, Israel has carried out and continues to carry out airstrikes, artillery strikes, and tank strikes against what they say are Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad military targets inside of Gaza as the fighting here continues, and crucially, as the fighting here so far has been escalating throughout the day. This round of fighting shatters what had been a relatively quiet few weeks over the course of the past month or so. This all started on Friday afternoon when Israel says a Palestinian sniper wounded 2 Israeli soldiers, one moderately, one lightly. Israel responded with an airstrike that killed 2 Gazan militants belonging to Hamas's military wing, and that led us into the escalation we've seen today. And so far, Frederica, it has continued, and we'll see where it goes from here, and crucially, if it continues to escalate.